Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today, we'll be discussing the recent Iranian presidential elections in which presidential candidate Rouhani won over 50% of the vote, in which the turnout was 37 million Iranians went to the polls. So in this program today, we'll be asking who is Rouhani, who has been portrayed by much of our Western media as a moderate and a reformer, or will he be a smokescreen of part of deception on part of the regime to change the face of the Iranian regime to make the regime look more moderate? The second part of the program will be discussing an exclusive that we have here on the Middle East Report that the Iranian banking system is in crisis. According to the central bank of Iran, Iran faces a dire economic situation that could lead to a collapse of the Iranian banks and the Iranian economy. And we're asking, what does this mean for the Iranian people? And could this be the key event that triggers a revolution in Iran? And so join me when I interview my guest today, Dr. Mehrdad Khonsari of the GreenWave movement. Dr. Mehrdad Khonsari, it's great to have you back on the Middle East Report. Remember the last time we were on, you were talking about your experiences of being caught up in the Islamic Revolution back in 1979 as an Iranian diplomat based here in London. But what are the challenges and the difficulties that you faced from the Islamic Republic of Iran since all those years since the revolution began in 79?
Well, I think first and foremost, the inability to go home feeling safe, having to live abroad, having members of your family arrested, harassed, having your property and whatever you owned confiscated for absolutely no justifiable reason, because someone like myself, what I owned, all my worldly possessions were nothing extravagant. It was something that was commensurate to my situation at the time and should never have been subjected to any kind of, confiscation or things like that. And obviously, I felt the need to get involved in the battle or in the struggle for injustice almost less than a year after the revolution. And though that struggle has continued and we have not been successful in the sense that the Islamic Republic of Iran still continues to govern our country, but what made my sort of decision, all the conditions that made my decision to enter the struggle at the time are just as strong now as they were then, because nothing in the way that we would like to see change has changed. Things have become worse, our people have become more impoverished, our reputation around the world has been shattered, the dignity and pride of our people has been severely damaged, our economy is in total meltdown, and everything, has just become much worse over the years. And so the need for us to continue with what I started some more than 30 years ago is just as great, if not much more now than it was then.
Excellent. And last week was the Iranian presidential elections in which Hassan Rouhani won the election with over 50% of the vote, and the turnout was something like 37 million Iranians went to the polls. What do you make of his election victory?
Well, I think Mr. Rouhani's victory has got to be seen in light of a massive vote in a referendum against Ayatollah Khamenei and the ruling establishment in Iran. it's not so much a vote for Mr. Rouhani as a vote against Ayatollah Khamenei. Just as, for example, the election in 1997 of Mr. Mohammad Khatami to the presidency was seen as a huge rejection of Ayatollah Khamenei, who had at that time backed a different candidate. Now, this time, Ayatollah Khamenei did not come out and specifically express his support in favor of a particular candidate, but it was common knowledge to all Iranians that Mr. Rouhani and another man who sort of represented the centrist, reformist, you might say, camp, were the least favored, of the number of candidates who were vetted. So when Mr. Rafsanjani, who himself had been disqualified, the former president, which is an unprecedented thing, a man who was a former president, who is currently the head of the Expediency Council, who has held all the top positions in the state, to be considered not eligible, for running for the presidency. When he bowed out, he expressed his support for Mr. Rouhani, as did Mr. Khatami and all the reformers. So essentially, a vote for Mr. Rouhani meant a vote against Ayatollah Khamenei and his band of followers. And this was a huge, you might say, referendum against the ruling establishment. Now, Mr. Rouhani has been able to be elected in the first ballot with over 50%, as you mentioned. And of course, while his election as a centrist and a reformer will divert attention away from Ayatollah Khamenei without question unto himself, but he has a mandate to try and move in the direction of the people, as opposed to a bankrupt and highly discredited ruling establishment.
Yeah, let's hope so. But firstly, I think we need to explain the Iranian political system, because anyone watching this program who doesn't know a great deal about Iranian politics will think that Iran has free and fair elections, but this is not the case, is it? The only candidates that can stand in this presidential election are those chosen by the supreme leader, Khamenei.
No, they're not the ones who are chosen by the supreme leader. You're right. The Iranian elections, whether parliamentary or presidential, they are not free in the sense that we hold elections in the West, or what people are commonly used to, in the sense that if you want to run for parliament in Britain, let's say, you go and you pay a deposit, you can be endorsed by a major party or not, and if you don't gain a certain number of votes, you lose your deposit. There is nobody essentially blocking you or vetting you from wanting to aspire for participation in any electoral process. Now, in other Western countries, you may have a little bit tougher than this, what we have today in Britain, but nevertheless, there is not a body that comes and says, unless you adhere to my ideology, unless you profess what I believe are, the guidelines, to which you must adhere, you cannot possibly be considered. Now, believing in the Islamic constitution is the first and foremost prerequisite for running for office in Iran. Now, the believing in the Iranian constitution means believing in the doctrine of velayat faqih, which translated in English means the jurisprudence of the clergy, or the guardianship of the clergy. That concept says that all adults in Iran are minors who are incapable of exercising their political rights by themselves, a right which they must defer to the clergy to exercise on their behalf. Now, if you have a preposterous thing in a constitution that essentially denies popular sovereignty or the right of self-determination to individuals, that, tells you a hell of a lot about the kind of system that this kind of a constitution represents. And all this is valid and, without question, something that makes Iranian elections not democratic in the Western sense. However, having said all that, once candidates are vetted, then usually, in the course of the last 34 years, with the exception of the presidential election of 2009, the state does not interfere in how the people vote. In other words, for whom they cast their votes out of those vetted candidates. Now, for a people like the Iranian people, who cannot enjoy the privileges of voting in a proper, fair, and free election like the ones that exist in Western societies, all they can do is to try and work with what they have, and to try and express their wishes and their aspirations within the confines that they can. And they have used that very cleverly in the past. For example, in 1997, when they chose Mohammad Khatami, this was against the expressed wishes of the supreme leader. So by giving him a landslide victory, they used their system to express their dissatisfaction,
yes,
through the only peaceful way that they could without being obstructed. Now, in 2009, they voted again for whom? For Mr. Mousavi, not for Mr. Ahmadinejad, and created a situation whereby the state had to intervene to, essentially replace the votes with votes that they had with the voting by stuffing the ballots and changing the decision, which led to the whole system becoming delegitimized. This time, the state did not resort to actions like they had in 2009, and they had thought that by vetting all these people that they could create a situation which they could control. But in the end, they lost control, because the candidate who won was not the candidate that they had wanted. And the Iranian people very cleverly and prudently used the only means available to them to tell themselves and to tell the entire world that where they stand, what they want, and what specifically they don't want.
Absolutely. And we've got a news clip to go to now that looks at the election victory of Rouhani as the new Iranian president.
Moderate cleric Hassan Rouhani has won Iran's presidential election, scoring a surprising landslide victory over conservative hardliners without the need of a second-round runoff. Rouhani secured just over 50% of the ballot. The outcome is unlikely to transform Iran's long tense relations with the West or lessen its support of embattled Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad. Such matters of national security remain the domain of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Rouhani has pledged to promote a policy of constructive interaction with the world and to enact a domestic civil rights charter.
Mehrdad, the new Iranian president, Rouhani, has been described very much as a moderate and as a reformer, and is in very stark contrast to that of his predecessor, Ahmadinejad. What is the truth regarding this?
I think that one has to give him the benefit of the doubt. He is definitely different than Mr. Ahmadinejad. His past record, his associations with Mr. Rafsanjani and Mr. Khatami obviously places him in a different category. He represented Iran in the nuclear talks, whereas his position was locked in the sense that he had to, essentially promote the policies which had been outlined specifically by the Supreme Leader. Nevertheless, he maintained, a certain amount of diplomatic courtesies. He did not, essentially intimidate others. He didn't try to create enmity for Iran and he conducted himself in a way that was quite rational and quite acceptable in modern diplomatic terms.
Yeah.
So he's a different kettle of fish. Now, the fact is that whatever he is or he is not, the choices that he faces when he accedes to the presidency are very, he is in a situation where his options are not that many. He faces tremendous economic pressure at home and total international isolation abroad. The Iranian regime cannot continue, indefinitely in the situation that they are at the moment. They cannot freeze this present situation indefinitely. So something has to give. And given his background, given the fact that, he is a man who understands, reality much better than Mr. Ahmadinejad, he's less dogmatic than Ahmadinejad, although he is a cleric, I think that there is an opportunity that things might move in the right direction. And certainly he has to be encouraged until such time that, one is convinced that he is definitely not bent on moving in that direction.
And we have a news clip to go to now, and it's entitled, How Moderate is the New Iranian President, Rouhani?
New reports on Iranian President-elect Hassan Rouhani have cast doubt on the moderate label he has been given by much of the international media. The London-based pan-Arab daily newspaper Al-Sharq Al-Awsat has revealed that Rouhani's son committed suicide over his father's close ties to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Rouhani was also leader of Iran's Supreme National Security Council in 1994, when it allegedly masterminded the bombing of a Jewish cultural center in Buenos Aires. Critics say the president-elect's radical leanings are shown by his moving to France in 1978 to join Ruhollah Khomeini, the Ayatollah who went on to lead the Islamic Revolution, which toppled the Iranian Shah in 1979.
Mehrdad, isn't there a great danger here that the fact is that Iran has a new president? He's not as belligerent and demonic as President Ahmadinejad. But the fact is that he represents this new movement of reform, that he's seen as the likable face of the regime, could actually lead the US administration and also Baroness Ashton's office with the EU Foreign Commission to then negotiate with the Iranians over Iran's nuclear weapons program. And actually he could do far more damage by being the moderate face of the regime without actually hiding the policies and their true intentions to acquire nuclear weapons and continue exporting terrorism around the world.
You see, all what you say is possible. And the fact is that we have to look at it in a different way for a number of reasons. If the Iranian regime could freeze the situation we are at this moment, in other words, they are heading towards acquiring nuclear weapons, but have not actually at this time crossed the red line that would incur some sort of a retaliation or military confrontation. Therefore, by not having reached that red line, they are not in a position to have to essentially back down over any negotiation, so they can sort of fool the public at home and say that we are forthright and so on, and nothing can deter us, and at the same time be safe that nothing adverse is going to happen to them. If they could freeze this situation, then what you said would make a great deal of sense. But you have to bear in mind that freezing the present situation means having to freeze the sanctions that are being levied against them on an increasing basis with every passing week, on top of all the sanctions that have come into effect right now. Now, the effect of the sanctions over the past 8 years is now beginning to make itself fully felt. The Iranian currency has dropped 67% in value in the last 12 months. Iranian you might say, non-governmental sector, the private sector is almost wiped out. Iranian banking system is destroyed. So when you put all these things together, all of these lead, uncontrollable inflation, uncontrollable unemployment. These pressures are building up. So the Iranian regime, by freezing this present situation, is making itself vulnerable to a kind of security threat for its existence that it had never confronted before. So this cannot continue. That's the point I'm making. Now, Mr. Rouhani, like all other Islamic leaders, came from a very hardline background. All of them did. But you have to bear in mind that 34 years ago, for example, all the members of the Revolutionary Guards, the Praetorian Guard of this system, believed in Khomeini, believed in Islam, believed in the revolution. I would contend that none of them believe in any of those three items today. They may give lip service, but those are not the deciding issues. People change in politics over the course of decades. And today is a time when a kind of political Iran is ripe for some kind of a political realignment, because nobody is who they were 30 years ago, whether people in the opposition or people who are governing the country. The people that conduct policies that are unacceptable are the supreme leader and those who are his cronies and those associated with what he says. Now, clearly, Mr. Rouhani is not in that category, as people like Mr. Rafsanjani or Khatami or Mousavi, who is languishing in jail. Mr. Mousavi was the Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Iran for 8 years. Mr. Karoubi was the Speaker of Parliament. Both these gentlemen are languishing in jail. So they are not proponents of the kind of policies being enunciated by the Supreme Leader. In summary, we have to look for ways of finding a political solution. The accession of Mr. Rouhani offers an opportunity. That opportunity should not be wasted, but that opportunity needs to show positive signs pretty quickly. He cannot be allowed to continue these policies indefinitely. But certainly, I think the Iranian people and Mr. Rouhani, given this exceptional position to which he has been elevated, ought to be given an opportunity to do the right thing.
Yeah, we've got a news clip to go to now. It's entitled "New Iranian President Expected to Stay Loyal to Iran's Nuclear Weapons Program and the 1979 Islamic Revolution."
Iran's president-elect Hassan Rouhani has paid a visit to the shrine of the late Iranian leader Ayatollah Khomeini in a sign that Rouhani, who has been hailed as a moderate, will seek to remain loyal to the principles of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The removal of outgoing President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is being broadly considered as positive for Israel, although the Jewish state will need to redefine its rhetoric concerning the Islamic Republic should Iran's new president not follow in his predecessor's footsteps in openly denying the Holocaust and expressing desire for Israel to be wiped off the map.
Israel's lost an asset in Iran. That asset was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. His belligerent talk and his threats against Israel created consensus against the Iranian nuclear program in the international community. Now in his place we have somebody who's moderate, and it's going to be more difficult to justify consensus against Iran. So, Israel has to change its rhetoric when it comes to Iran.
Hassan Rouhani's surprise victory puts him in charge of an executive branch that traditionally has taken the lead in handling the economy, while nuclear, defense and foreign affairs remain in the hands of ruling clerics and their powerful protectors, the Revolutionary Guard. People of Iranian heritage in Israel have also been expressing their hopes for a de-escalation of bilateral tensions.
I'm Iranian, I was born in Iran. I love Iran. But I'm in Israel, I love Israel too. Iran is like my mother. Israel is like my father, something like that. I don't want to war with Israel and Iran.
Rouhani will take office in August, before which he needs Parliament to approve his proposed nominees for 18 ministries. In the meantime, Israel will be asking world leaders to remain vigilant in not assuming that the arrival of a new Iranian president will immediately result in Tehran ceasing to be a threat to the Jewish state.
So, Mehrdad, there are very big question marks over Rouhani. There's certainly question marks over his presidency and the direction that he will take Iran. But I have to ask you the question, how much power is he going to have to actually deliver serious political and economic reforms in Iran?
Well, the fact is that the president does not have the kind of powers, that decisive powers that will change direction. Our only hope is that as a result of this public sentiment, you see, what is important is not Mr. Rouhani, is the public sentiment. The fact that he was elected is a sign to the leadership in Iran where the Iranian public stands. Now, if they want to continue with the same policies, then obviously they are fomenting a new explosion within the country, because the economic situation cannot improve. The social situation cannot improve. And none of these will improve until this nuclear dilemma is somehow settled. Now, Iran cannot enter or hope to solve the nuclear dilemma by sticking to the kind of positions which Mr. Ahmadinejad and the previous administration, albeit under the directorship of the supreme leader, had been proceeding. Something has got to give. Unless that is given, none of these will improve, and Mr. Rouhani will not be able to do anything. The hope is that, given the fact that the Iranian people at this time have so openly expressed where they stand on various issues, that the supreme leader would use this opportunity of this new man entering into office to initiate a new set of policies that would help remove Iran from the brink of disaster and give voice to some of Iran's legitimate rights, which have been drowned out as a result of Ahmadinejad's belligerent and stupid way of behavior.
Excellent. And we've got a news clip to go to now that is entitled "Tehran Markets Respond Positively to the News that Rouhani has won the Iranian presidential election."
Iran's stock exchange and currency markets have reacted positively to Hassan Rouhani's victory in the country's presidential election. The stock exchange has jumped up by 2%, while the rial has increased by 9% against the US dollar. However, the rial has lost more than half its value over the past year, mainly due to the government's economic mismanagement and Western oil and banking sanctions imposed in response to Iran's nuclear ambitions. As a result, Iran has suffered a sharp drop in foreign exchange revenues. The so-called moderate Rouhani won the election outright by gaining almost 51% of the vote, eliminating the need for a runoff. He has spoken of his desire to make Iran's nuclear program completely transparent, although has previously claimed the Persian state's diplomatic statements were a ruse designed to buy more time to move nuclear plans forward.
Mehrdad, this is part of the program where we're talking about this exclusive news story we have here on the Middle East Report, which is incredible. A document that is entitled "The Seal of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Supreme National Security," and it's a document that's been obtained by the GreenWave movement that was being released by the governor of the Central Bank of Iran, that essentially says that Iran is on the verge of a banking crisis that could lead to the entire collapse of the economy. Can you tell us about this very, very important and significant document and what it means, and also the legitimacy of this document?
Well,
validity, sorry.
These are a series of documents that were obtained through people at the heart of the Iranian regime who are connected with GreenWave. And we held a press conference in Paris about a week ago, in which the founder of GreenWave, my colleague Mr. Amir Hossein Jahanshah, and myself attended, and he went over the exact nature of each document. These were, to begin with, a letter, a report from the governor of the central bank, Mr. Bahmani, addressed to the supreme leader, addressed to the first vice president of Iran, expressing the kind of problems that the Central Bank of Iran has been having. This was in turn relayed to the office of the supreme leader, and the supreme leader's views and policies and orders were expressed in a letter to the Supreme National Security Council by the head of the supreme leader's, the head of the economic sector at the supreme leader's office. All these documents are genuine, and they have been in the public domain. They were revealed 2 days before the election, because there are suggestions and planned policies which were to be implemented in the aftermath of the election. So we decided to publish them, despite the fact that they would have been drowned out as a result of the publicity and attention given to the election itself, but so that the Iranian people would be aware. Now, nobody has denied the authenticity of that. The central bank has denied a few numbers, or you might say a few, has repudiated the allegation regarding certain numbers, as opposed to the whole thrust of the report. So the reports are, in my view, quite genuine. The government has had a chance to repudiate them if they had wanted to. They have not done so, with the exception of this slight repudiation from the central bank. Now, the content of this is mind-boggling.
Absolutely, and this is one you talk about now, the content. I mean, just having a look at the press release here, I mean, it says here that Iran needs $40 billion to bail out the banks, otherwise they believe there's going to be a banking crisis. And also what this means for the Iranian people is quite astonishing. The imposition of 20% of the accounts of the bank customers, as well as severe restrictions on withdrawal of funds for customer accounts, and also Iran not having access to, is it something like
100 billion?
100 billion of foreign currency.
See, the fact is that, I mean, one of the tragedies facing my country is the fact that we are a wealthy, rich country, impoverished as a result of bad government. Even as we speak today, Iran has over 100, or almost up to $100 billion of foreign currency reserves, to which it has no access because of the sanctions and because of its ridiculous, policies regarding the nuclear issue that have led to this stalemate. As a result of the sanctions, all the Iranian banks are bankrupt. They have to be bankrolled, as mentioned in the press release, up to the tune of around $40 billion by the central bank. Now, the projected revenue from oil of Iran, which was $50 billion last year, is projected $35 billion for this year. Now, if you have to pay $40 billion to keep your banks afloat, I mean, that tells the whole story. Because of the fact that they are running short of money, and of course in the report it comes that as a result of the sanctions, the central bank does not have enough material to print new money or to make new coins. So, I mean, that is something that all banks require. They need people to turn up wanting, notes and coins, and there just isn't enough to go around. And this is another major problem. So what they have thought of, and which the supreme leader has ordered, is that once the elections are over, that up to 20% of bank holders' accounts should be confiscated, as under the, in this sort of like the Cyprus model.
Oh, yes.
What happened in Cyprus, along those lines, so that it would be sort of It would be confiscated under the guise of a new tax. Now,
that's not going to be popular.
This is sticking your hands into the people's pockets in the most overt and most outrageous way. Now, the central bank had made a suggestion to the supreme leader that it could be 10% or 15% or 20%. The 20% was the supreme leader's choice. Now, when we revealed that in the documents, as I mentioned before earlier, the central bank repudiated the fact that it is not 20%, meaning that it could be 15% or 10%. They did not say that the whole concept was being rejected, but rather the amount to which people's personal banks could be liable for this kind of taxation. Now, this is, as I said, they are afraid that once they make this public, that there would be a rush to the banks for people to withdraw their money. And for this, they have taken precautionary measures of assigning Revolutionary Guard units and Basij units, these militias, these sort of, revolutionary militias, to guard the various banks in order to ensure that people do not rush. And at the same time, they're planning to place restrictions into the amount that each individual can withdraw from their banks on a daily basis so that all the funds are not withdrawn. So this is quite drastic, these measures. And of course, we decided to make all of this public and known to the Iranian people.
Exactly. What are the implications of this? Because it's really during very, very difficult economic times that we see revolutions. Do you believe that this could be the key economic indicators or circumstances, effectively, that lead to another Iranian revolution?
Well, I don't want to say that this will necessarily lead to an Iranian revolution, but it sure as hell is a major catalyst for that. Now, if you discuss the Iranian economy and the problems that it faces at this time with any international economist or Iran expert on economic matters, they will verify the kind of problems that are included in the report which the head of the central bank has written. Now, the country, whether they actually go ahead and implement those exact policies, because you have to bear in mind, because we made this public, their natural inclination is to say that we are lying and that we have made up these things ourselves. That's the common sort of, you might say, response that one expects from these people. But the fact is, forget about us in this equation. These problems are real. They need to be dealt with. But if they were to actually confiscate 20% of bank holders' assets because of their failed policies, and you have to bear in mind that during the presidential campaign, that is one of the points that we raised in the press conference. None of the presidential candidates discussed any of these issues. Now, we know for sure that one or two of them were definitely aware of these decisions. Maybe not all, and maybe Mr. Rouhani himself was not aware. But certainly Mr. Jalili, who was rumored to be the supreme leader's favorite choice to become president, Mr. Velayati, his foreign policy advisor, and possibly Mr. Ghalibaf, the Tehran mayor, who has high connections in the Revolutionary Guards, could have been informed. So these things are not. These are not. You might say nuclear science. People every day feel these things in the streets of Tehran.
Yeah. Can I read?
And unless they're remedied, they are certainly a catalyst.
Yeah, Mehrdad, can I read out some of the from the actual document itself? According to this document, it says here that banks in Iran owe the Central Bank of Iran over $89 billion, and the government owed the banks over $50 billion. And then we got down here that 34 million citizens owe money to the bank, most of them having difficulty repaying their loans. and there are lawsuits against 72 million citizens as a result.
7.2.
7.2. It says Iranian citizens' overall debt amounts to $29 billion. And it says here that Iranian companies owe $368 billion to the bank. And yeah, it seems it's absolutely dire. There is even talk of ordinary Iranians who can't pay their water bills or their gas bills or their electricity bills being cut off. Surely the economic situation, because of the sanctions and because of Iran's belligerence in pushing forward their nuclear weapons program, it's the Iranian people that are really paying a high price here.
Absolutely, there's no question about that. Of course, the government has had to face a decision about 2 weeks ago what to do with people who are not paying their electric bills and phone bills or whatever, water bills, and they decided not to do anything about it. In other words, not to take any countermeasures at this time, because that would really infuriate the masses. But mismanagement, corruption. I mean, at a time when, as you mentioned, 7.2 million lawsuits are against people who are incapable of paying their debts to the banks, there is a small percentage of people, very small network of people at the very top, who are skimming the cream of everything, and they are billionaires, much like sort of the fabled talk that used to go around about Russian oligarchs. Now, this is in a country that has become impoverished. Its people are suffering. Its people, I mean, if, for example, they have placed foreign currency foreign currency curtailment of taking out no more than $1,000 each individual when they go abroad. What can you do with $1,000 at this time, in this day and age? Or $500 if you leave through a land border. Now, when ordinary citizens can take no more than $1,000, you have people with 1.2 or 1.3 or billion-dollar bank accounts in Switzerland and in places like that, all associated to the top echelons of the ruling establishment. And they have had to, I mean, in Iran there are more Porsches being imported at this time and more Mercedes-Benz than any time before in the last 20, 25 years. But who are the people who are using this to have inflated the number of exports of these vehicles to this country in a way that it competes with everywhere else?
Yeah, and of course we've seen a huge increase in unemployment, a huge increase in inflation in Iran. I'm not an economist, but just looking at the figures in this document are absolutely staggering. But what do you think the implications of this? If, for example, the Iranian government, in wanting to shore up the banks, starts taking money out of individual bank accounts, starts suing more people to pay more bills that they owe, what are the implications if the actual Iranian bank system collapses? Will that lead to economic collapse? And what will Iran be like under those circumstances?
Well, I mean, you imagine from the perspective of Western audiences what happened in the United States at the time of the economic depression. What happened to Germany? What happened to, you might say, in orderly Western states when something like that happened? Now you compound that by a factor of 100 and imagine what happens. The election of Mr. Rouhani was an indication to the regime of where the people stood without this knowledge, without the government having actually placed its hand into the pockets of individuals. But if you deny people the right to go and take their own money out of the banks, or, for example, one of the highlights of Mr. Ahmadinejad's claims in the past 8 years is that he removed subsidies and he gave, assistance to needy families. Subsidies have been removed. The price of all basic commodities which people need for their daily lives has increased by several folds. the amount of compensation given to them is minute. So essentially, even the poor people whom this government, the Ahmadinejad government, and the Islamic Republic as a whole, used to present itself as the bastion of support for them, they are the ones who are suffering the most. So the country will face chaos, and I am confident that the days of the Islamic Republic will be hugely numbered unless they are able to deal with this. And of course, the key to dealing with any of this rests on settling Iran's problems with the international community, which means arriving at some sort of a reasonable, you might say, agreement with the 5+1 over the nuclear issue.
Yeah. But isn't there a great danger here, for example, that the Iranian regime itself, the new president, and also the supreme leader of Iran will actually blame the West for their woes and all their troubles?
Well, I don't think that gets anywhere. Nobody believes in any of that. Look, again, look at the Iranian election. People who have looked at Iran from suspicious eyes, I myself being at the forefront of somebody who has been in opposition to this regime for well over 30 years, we have to look at this election result in light of how it should be seen at this time. The people of Iran do not want the continuation of the kind of policies that they have been forced to go along with.
Yep.
They are looking to Rouhani to change that. Unless Rouhani changes that, then the problem is not going to go away, and the animosity and hatred is going to become more.
Yeah. Mehrdad, sadly we're down to the last 5 minutes of the programme, and with this breaking news of the absolute dire state the Iranian economy is in, primarily to do with corruption and sanctions, how should the West respond? How should the British government, how should the EU, how should the US administration respond by reaching out to the Iranian people against this vile, evil regime?
Well, I think that the West needs to give Mr. Rouhani an opportunity to come clean. By the West, I don't mean the kind of sycophants and, you might say, lobbyists, you know, who have tried to promote themselves in the course of the last 10, 20 years by allying themselves with different interest groups within the Islamic regime. I don't mean like the people, for example, in Parliament here who are known to be Iran lobbyists. I don't mean them. I'm talking about reasonable, hardcore people within the ruling establishment in the Western countries who are seeking a political solution to something that can grow out of proportion and turn into some kind of a military conflict. President Obama is on the record in the last 5 or 6 months to saying that if Iran crosses the red line, that he's not bluffing. Now, the best thing is to avoid any kind of military confrontation.
Absolutely.
Avoiding that means giving Rouhani an opportunity to come clean, to change direction, to use the opportunity of his election to browbeat the supreme leader by forcing him to understand that the policies that he's pursued is worked against the Iranian nation, and the Iranian nation will not go along with any of them indefinitely. And Iranian nation does not want war, does not want separation, does not want further economic decline. So I think that by giving Rouhani an opportunity, they will test the waters, and if the response is positive, then I think everyone will be better off.
And also, last 3 minutes of the programme, Mehrdad, surely the Iranian people must be sick and tired of the amount of money that the Iranian regime is wasting in sponsoring international terrorism by deploying the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in Syria, by sending troops out there, by giving billions of dollars each year to Hezbollah, supporting Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and all the other terror networks around the world. Surely Iran could actually save money if the money was actually spent on the Iranian people rather than spent on terrorism.
No, there's no question about that. When I say that the people of Iran voted against the supreme leader, they voted against him and his policies as a whole. the nuclear issue is one issue. Iran's involvement in terrorism, Iran's involvement in creating regional mayhem, in trying to export its revolution, in trying to act as a revolutionary anti-status quo system that tries to foment trouble against Western values and things like that across the globe, not just in the Middle East or in Syria, but in places like Venezuela or South America or wherever. All of these things have to come to an end. Iran has got to reintegrate itself into the community of nations. That is what the Iranian people want. If Mr. Rouhani does not deliver on these accounts, Mr. Rouhani will join the ranks of all the other rejected people, and Iranian people will move forward, and we will see the back of this regime one way or another.
Well, let's hope that happens, because we have to understand that the nature of this regime is
we believe in
incredibly
GreenWave. We want to overthrow the system. That is our position. But if through Mr. Rouhani or someone like him, there can be a possibility for bringing gradual change, a change that leads to regime change in a peaceful way, in a way that does not involve military confrontation, does not involve civil war, we should embrace that. If not, then we have to go the full direction and seek what our country badly needs.
Yeah, Dr. Mehrdad Khonsari, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today on the Middle East Report, and thank you for talking about the Iranian presidential elections.
My pleasure.
And I want to thank you all for watching today's program, as we've been discussing the Iranian presidential elections and some of the challenges facing the new Iranian president, and certainly with this report coming to light that Iran faces banking collapse, economic collapse. This could sow the seeds of revolution in Iran, and hopefully this will result in a transfer from a totalitarian evil regime to a full functioning democracy where the people of Iran have freedom to choose their own government, have freedom to have the freedom of worship, freedom of speech, and enjoy all the wonderful hallmarks of democracy we have here in Britain. I want to thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.
وطن اگرچه با خشت جان خویش ستون به سقف تو میزنم اگرچه با استخوان خویش دوباره میبویم از تو گل به میل نسل جوان تو دوباره میشویم از تو خون به سیل اشک روان خویش اگرچه 100 سال مرده ام بگو برکنم قلب اهرمن به نعره آنچنان خویش. اگرچه پیرم ولی هنوز مجال تعلیم اگر بود، جوانی آغاز می کنم کنار نوباوگان خویش. دوباره می سازمت وطن، اگرچه با خشت جان خویش، ستون به سقف تو می زنم، اگرچه با استخوان خویش. دوباره می سازمت وطن، اگرچه با خشت جان خویش، ستون به سقف تو می زنم، اگرچه با استخوان خویش.